I stood frozen in my kitchen, phone still clutched in my trembling hand. My son Jackson's words echoed in my ears. Stay in the garage for a few days. I'm bringing my husband, his parents, and his friends over. If you embarrass us, I'll put you in a home. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This country house, purchased with my beloved Martha's inheritance after 42 years of marriage, was supposed to be my healing sanctuary after her death. Now my own flesh and blood wanted me hidden away like some shameful family secret. Martha and I met in college back in 1979. She was studying literature, and I was fumbling my way through business classes. We locked eyes across the campus coffee shop, and that was it. For 42 years, we built a life together, brick by brick, dream by dream. She was my anchor, my compass, my home. When the cancer diagnosis came, it felt like someone had pulled the ground out from under our feet. 3 years of treatments, hopes raised and dashed, moments of remission followed by devastating returns. Martha faced it all with a grace that still humbles me when I think about it. In those final months, we talked about everything. Our regrets, our proudest moments, what we hoped for our 2 children, Amy and Jackson. King, she'd said to me one evening, her voice thin but determined, promise me you won't let grief consume you. Find a new chapter, something that brings you peace. After she passed, I discovered she'd left detailed instructions with her will. Martha had inherited a substantial sum from her parents years earlier, and she'd made the decision to leave most of it to me rather than splitting it evenly between myself and the kids. King will need this to rebuild, her letter to the attorney had said. The children are established in their lives. My husband will need to create something new. Amy understood completely. At 38, she had a successful career as a pediatrician, 2 beautiful children, and a supportive husband. She visited regularly, called almost daily in those early months, and told me repeatedly that Mom had made the right decision. Jackson was a different story. At 34, he'd always been more distant, more complicated in our relationship. When he came out as gay in college, I hadn't handled it well initially, something I deeply regretted and had worked hard to make amends for over the years. We'd reached a better place eventually, but there remained a certain coolness, a careful distance that never quite disappeared. After Martha's funeral, Jackson visited exactly twice. He didn't call for weeks at a time. When I mentioned using some of the inheritance to move somewhere new, his response was curt, "Do whatever you want, Dad. It's your money now." The city house where Martha and I had raised our family became unbearable after she was gone. Every corner held a memory. Every room echoed with her absence. 6 months after her death, I made the decision to use a portion of the inheritance to buy a peaceful country house about 2 hours outside the city. 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen that opened onto a deck overlooking 2 acres of land with mature trees and a small pond. Martha would have loved it. For a year, I slowly built a new life. I planted a vegetable garden, joined a local book club, volunteered at the community center teaching basic woodworking. The crushing weight of grief didn't disappear, but it became manageable. I could breathe again. Then came Jackson's call. After months of minimal contact, his voice was suddenly warm, interested. He wanted to visit with his husband Brady, whom I'd only met twice. Brady's parents were in town, along with some friends from their social circle, and they all wanted to see this country retreat I'd been talking about. "It'll be great, Dad," Jackson said, enthusiasm bubbling through the phone. "We can all spend some quality time together. Brady's parents are dying to meet you." I was thrilled. This was what I'd been hoping for. A chance to rebuild my relationship with my son, to create new family memories in this place that had become my sanctuary. But then Jackson's tone shifted. "Listen, Dad, there's just one small thing. Could you maybe stay in the garage apartment while we're there? Brady's parents are pretty traditional, and they might feel uncomfortable." "You know." "Uncomfortable with what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Just. They're used to a certain lifestyle, and they're important people in Brady's life. I need to make a good impression." The conversation devolved from there, Jackson's requests becoming demands, his tone growing increasingly harsh when I expressed hesitation. "Stay in the garage for a few days. I'm bringing my husband, his parents, and his friends over. If you embarrass us, I'll put you in a home." That final threat left me speechless. Put me in a home? On what grounds? I was 64 years old, in excellent health both physically and mentally, and completely independent. The implication that he could or would force me into assisted living was not just hurtful, it was alarming. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. This wasn't just about accommodating guests. Something else was going on. Later that evening, I received a text from a neighbor in the city who still lived near our old house. "Congratulations on Jackson and Brady's new country place. Saw Jackson's post about it online. Looks beautiful." I sat staring at my phone, a cold realization washing over me. Jackson was telling people the house was his. The garage apartment was comfortable enough. I'd renovated it for eventual guests, or perhaps a caretaker when I grew older. It had a small kitchenette, bathroom, living area, and bedroom. Still, the act of preparing it for myself rather than for visitors felt deeply wrong. This was my home, purchased with my wife's inheritance, meant to be my healing place. As I moved some essentials into the space, I came across a box of family photos I'd been meaning to organize. There was Jackson at 10 years old, grinning widely with his first fishing catch. Jackson at his high school graduation, Martha beaming beside him while he looked somewhere off camera, already pulling away from us. Jackson at 20, home for Christmas but tense and quiet throughout the visit. I remembered the night he told us he was gay. Martha had embraced him immediately, told him she loved him unconditionally. I'd been silent, struggling with outdated views and fears. It took me weeks to finally sit down with him, to tell him I loved him no matter what, that I was sorry for my initial reaction. By then, a distance had grown between us that never fully closed. Had I failed him so badly that he now felt entitled to push me aside? Was this his delayed revenge for my imperfect acceptance years ago? Or was something else driving this behavior? I called Amy the next morning, needing her level-headed perspective. "Dad, this is ridiculous," she said after I explained Jackson's demands. "It's your house. You don't need to stay in the garage for anyone." "I know, but he seemed so adamant. I don't want to damage our relationship further." "There's something you should know," Amy said after a pause. "Jackson's been telling people that Mom's inheritance was meant to be split equally, but you manipulated the will somehow. He told my friend Lisa that the country house was supposed to be partially his inheritance." The accusation stunned me. Martha and I had discussed her wishes at length during her illness. She had been absolutely clear about her decisions, and those decisions were reflected in legal documents prepared months before her death, when she was still fully competent and strong in her convictions. "That's completely false," I said, anger finally breaking through my hurt. "You know that's not what happened." "I know, Dad. I've corrected people when I can, but Jackson's been spreading this story for months." After our call, I did something I rarely do. I went online to look at social media. I didn't maintain accounts myself, but I knew how to find Jackson's public profiles. What I discovered left me speechless. There were dozens of posts about our new country estate, photos of the house and grounds taken during Jackson's only brief visit 6 months ago, discussions of renovation plans and future entertaining. In the comments, Jackson responded to congratulations with phrases like, "Thanks. It's been a dream of ours for years, and finally got our perfect weekend retreat." My hands shook as I continued searching. Brady's family name, Preston, was well known in business circles. Thomas Preston had built a successful chain of luxury hotels across the Northeast, but recent business news suggested the Preston hotel empire had been struggling since the pandemic, with several properties closed or sold to competitors. On a real estate website, I discovered something that turned my concern to alarm. Draft renovation plans for my house, labeled Preston Williams Country Estate, Williams being Jackson's surname. The plans showed extensive, expensive changes, walls removed, additions built, the simple country aesthetic I'd created completely overwritten with something much more ostentatious. The renovation was scheduled to begin in 3 months. I sat back, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a visit or about Jackson being embarrassed by his father. This was about taking control of a valuable asset. My home, my sanctuary. For the first time since Martha's death, I felt truly alone. The person I would have turned to for guidance was gone, and one of the 2 people she'd left behind to love and support me appeared to be orchestrating my removal from my own home. "Martha," I whispered to the empty room, "what would you have me do?" No answer came, of course. But as I sat there, I felt a familiar resolve building within me. The same determination that had helped me build a business from nothing, that had sustained me through Martha's illness, that had given me the strength to start over after her death. I would not be bullied out of my own home. But neither would I create a scene that would permanently damage my relationship with my son. I needed more information, more understanding of what was truly happening. And then I needed a plan. The caravan of luxury vehicles arrived precisely at noon on Friday. A sleek black SUV carrying Jackson and Brady, followed by a silver Mercedes sedan that I assumed belonged to the Prestons. Behind them came another SUV, with 4 additional people I didn't recognize. Following Jackson's instructions, I greeted them from the garage apartment doorway rather than the main house. I had decided to play along for now, to observe and understand what was really happening before deciding how to respond. "Dad!" Jackson called out, his voice overly bright. "There you are. Come meet everyone." I approached the group, smiling warmly despite the knot in my stomach. Brady, tall and impeccably dressed as always, gave me a quick, formal handshake. "Good to see you again, King." Thomas and Catherine Preston were exactly what I'd expected. Polished, affluent, with the slightly bored expressions of people accustomed to luxury. Thomas barely acknowledged me with a nod, while Catherine extended a manicured hand and murmured, "Charming place you have here." The others were introduced as friends of Brady and Jackson, a gallery owner, an architect, and a couple who apparently worked in brand development, whatever that meant. "Dad's been kind enough to let us have the run of the main house for the weekend," Jackson announced to the group. "He's quite comfortable in his little apartment, aren't you, Dad?" The way he said it, as if I were a welcomed guest rather than the homeowner, sent a chill through me. But I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "It's cozy. I hope everyone enjoys their stay." Catherine Preston leaned toward her husband, not quite whispering. "Jackson said it would be rustic, but I hadn't expected quite this provincial." "It has potential," Thomas replied, "with the right vision." They didn't bother to lower their voices or check if I could hear them. I was clearly irrelevant to their assessment, a non-entity in their world. Jackson began leading everyone toward the main house, where he punched in the door code as if he'd been doing it for years rather than having just received it yesterday. "Let me show you around our place," he said, emphasizing the word "our" while avoiding my gaze. I followed at a distance, watching as Brady immediately began pointing out features of the house that he would definitely change and spaces that had potential if we knock out that wall. The architect friend took notes on a tablet, occasionally asking questions about load-bearing walls and electrical systems, questions directed at Brady, not at me. Dinner that evening was a surreal experience. Jackson had arranged for catering, completely bypassing my offers to cook. The dining table that Martha and I had carefully selected, a beautiful oak piece that could seat 8 comfortably, was now crowded with expensive wine bottles and elaborate place settings I'd never seen before. During the meal, I attempted to subtly reassert my ownership by sharing stories about selecting the property and my plans for the garden expansion in spring. "Actually," Brady interrupted, "we're thinking of putting a pool and entertainment area where that garden is. This place needs to be more suitable for proper entertaining." The conversation flowed around me as if I weren't there. The Prestons discussed their favorite architects. The gallery owner suggested artists whose work would elevate the space. The brand developers talked about how the property could be positioned as an exclusive retreat venue. Not once did anyone acknowledge that these discussions involved my home, my property, my life. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom. As I passed Jackson and Brady's temporarily assigned bedroom, I overheard Jackson's voice through the partially open door. "Don't worry about Dad," he was saying to someone. Presumably Brady. "He doesn't really understand what's going on most of the time anymore. Early stages of dementia," the doctor said. "Can't manage his affairs." I froze, my hand gripping the hallway wall for support. "Your father seems perfectly lucid to me," came Thomas Preston's doubtful voice. "It comes and goes," Jackson replied smoothly. "Good days and bad days. That's why we're looking into assisted living options. It's really for his own good." "And the property would then?" Thomas left the question hanging. As his only son, I'd assume responsibility, of course. The transition of assets would be straightforward with the right documentation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My son was lying about my mental health, laying groundwork to have me declared incompetent, planning to take control of my home and assets. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. I quietly returned to the garage apartment, locked the door, and sat in the darkness. For the first time since Martha's funeral, I broke down completely. Deep, racking sobs tore through me as I confronted the truth. My son, my only son, was methodically planning to dismantle my life for his own gain. "Martha," I whispered between sobs, "what did we do wrong? How did we raise a child capable of this?" No answer came, of course. But as my tears finally subsided, I felt something new emerging from the pain. A cold, clear determination. If Jackson was planning to declare war on me, he would discover that his 64-year-old father still had plenty of fight left in him. The next morning, I called Walter Davidson, my old friend and a retired attorney who had handled both my business affairs and our family legal matters for decades. "King, this is serious," Walter said after I explained the situation. "If Jackson is actually planning to have you declared incompetent, you need to take immediate steps to protect yourself." "Am I at risk of losing my home?" "Not immediately. The house is in your name, purchased with funds that were legally left to you. But if someone were to successfully petition for guardianship on grounds of mental incompetence, they could gain control of your assets, including the property." Walter's advice was clear. Document my mental competence, gather evidence of Jackson's deception, and prepare countermeasures, in case legal action became necessary. My next call was to Martha's sister Eleanor. Though we'd remained in touch after Martha's death, our conversations had grown less frequent over the past year. "King, it's so good to hear from you," Eleanor exclaimed. "How's that beautiful country place treating you?" "That's actually why I'm calling, Eleanor. I need to understand exactly what Martha specified in her will regarding the inheritance. There seems to be some confusion." Eleanor's voice turned serious. "What kind of confusion?" Martha was extremely clear about her wishes. I explained what was happening, including Jackson's claims that the inheritance should have been split equally and that the house should partly belong to him. "That's absolutely false," Eleanor said firmly. "I was there when Martha finalized her will. She specifically wanted you to have the bulk of the inheritance to build a new life. She was concerned about Jackson's materialistic tendencies. She loved him dearly, but she worried that money would only feed certain aspects of his personality that weren't his best." "Did she leave any specific instructions beyond the legal documents?" "Yes, there was a personal letter included with the will." "Don't you have it?" I didn't recall seeing any personal letter. "What did it say?" "I don't know the details, but Martha told me she'd written her thoughts about why she made the decisions she did and her hopes for how the inheritance would be used. The attorney should have given it to you, along with the other documents." I thanked Eleanor and promised to stay in touch. After hanging up, I went to the fireproof box where I kept all important documents. There, in a separate envelope I had somehow overlooked, was a letter in Martha's handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before her death. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. "My dearest King, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next, and you're facing life without me. My heart breaks knowing you're in pain. You were the love of my life, my rock, my home. I've made decisions about my inheritance that may surprise our children. Please understand that these choices come from deep thought and love for all of you. The bulk of my inheritance is for you, King. Not because I love you more than our children, but because at this stage of life, you need it most. Amy and Jackson are established in their lives. You are facing the challenge of building something new without me. Use this gift to create peace for yourself. Find a new home if our old one holds too much pain. Travel if it brings you joy. Support causes we believed in together. This money isn't meant to be hoarded or preserved for the children. It's meant to give you a foundation for your next chapter. A specific note about Jackson. I love our son deeply, but I worry about his relationship with money and status. I've seen how material things and appearances have become too important to him. Leaving him a large inheritance now would only feed those tendencies rather than encouraging the deeper values we tried to instill in him. The smaller portion I've left for him is meant to help with something meaningful. Education, a home, a chance to pursue work that fulfills his soul rather than his bank account. My deepest hope is that both our children will understand that these decisions were made with careful thought and love. If there is confusion or hurt, please share this letter with them. Go forward with courage, my love. Find joy again. Know that my love for you continues, even if I do not. Forever yours, Martha. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Martha had anticipated exactly what was happening now. She had seen in Jackson what I had been blind to, a materialism and status consciousness that had apparently grown to the point where he would lie and manipulate to get what he wanted. With renewed purpose, I began implementing Walter's advice. I scheduled an appointment with my doctor for a complete physical and cognitive assessment. I organized all my financial records, property documents, and Martha's will and letter in a secure but accessible location. Then I took a step that felt extreme but necessary. I purchased a small recording device and placed it in the main living room of the house. Wisconsin was a one-party consent state for recordings, and since it was my home, I had legal right to record what happened there. Over the next 2 days, the recordings revealed exactly what I feared. When I wasn't present, Jackson, Brady, and the Prestons spoke openly about their plans. "The location is perfect for what we need," Thomas Preston said during one conversation. "Close enough to the city for weekend access, far enough for exclusivity. If we add the North Wing extension and renovate the grounds as discussed, this could be exactly the showcase property the Preston brand needs right now." "Dad has no idea what this place could be worth with the right improvements," Jackson replied. "He thinks it's just a retirement cottage." Another recording captured Brady on the phone with someone about construction plans. "We can start the initial work in 3 months. The current occupant will be relocated by then." "No, we'll handle that. It's a family matter." "Yes, full renovation of all interior spaces, plus the additions we discussed." The most damning evidence came from a conversation between Jackson and Brady late one evening. "Are you sure we can pull this off?" Brady asked, his voice tense. "Your father seems pretty attached to this place." "Dad's not in a position to manage his own affairs anymore," Jackson replied, repeating the lie he'd told the Prestons. "Once we get the right medical opinions, establishing guardianship shouldn't be difficult. The court will see that we're looking out for his best interests. And if he fights it, then we remind him of certain things from the past, like his reaction when I came out, how he initially rejected me, how it took him weeks to even speak to me afterward. He carries enough guilt about that to be manipulated. Trust me, he'll choose the path of least resistance. He always has." Hearing my son speak of using my greatest regret as leverage against me was the final blow. Any doubt about his intentions vanished. Jackson wasn't confused about the inheritance or mistaken about ownership of the house. He was orchestrating a calculated takeover of my property and using my love for him as a weapon. That night, I finalized my plan. I would appear to be considering their demands, even agreeing to discuss the possibility of signing over partial ownership of the property. This would buy me time to arrange all my countermeasures. Then I would confront them, not with anger or accusations, but with irrefutable evidence and witnesses who could support my position. It would be painful. It would likely damage my relationship with Jackson, perhaps permanently. But I could not allow myself to be manipulated and displaced from my own home based on lies. As Martha had written, this house was meant to be my sanctuary, my new chapter. I would not surrender it without a fight. A week into their visit, the situation had deteriorated significantly. What had begun as subtle dismissal of my presence had evolved into overt takeover of my home. Jackson and Brady had moved their clothes into the primary bedroom, my bedroom, claiming the guest room was too small for their needs. The Prestons had extended their stay from the original weekend to a full 10 days, treating the house like a hotel and me like staff. "Dad, could you fix the issue with the hot water in the east bathroom?" Jackson would demand rather than ask. "And we need more towels. The good ones, not those thin ones you put out yesterday." I played my role, appearing compliant and slightly confused at times, feeding into their narrative of my declining competence while continuing to gather evidence. I noticed Jackson carefully documenting any minor memory lapse or momentary confusion, while ignoring the many demonstrations of my clear cognitive function. Brady treated the house as if he already owned it, moving furniture, discussing wall colors with his architect friend, even marking areas with tape for future renovation. "This wall will come down," he announced one morning, slapping the kitchen wall that held Martha's collection of hand-painted plates. "Open concept is essential for entertaining. Those plates have sentimental value," I said quietly. They were Martha's. Brady barely glanced at me. "We'll find somewhere to store them. Or donate them. They don't really fit the aesthetic we're going for." The Prestons were even worse, discussing me as if I weren't present, making comments about people who shouldn't live alone at his age, and suitable facilities for seniors with memory issues. Catherine Preston had the habit of speaking to me very slowly and loudly, as one might address a toddler or someone hard of hearing, despite no evidence I suffered from either condition. The breaking point came during a dinner where Brady and Jackson had invited additional friends, a couple who apparently worked in elder care. "King," the woman said kindly. "Too kindly. Jackson tells us you've been having some trouble managing on your own lately." I looked at Jackson, whose expression was a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Dad's been struggling since Mom died. Some days are better than others." "I'm managing perfectly well," I replied calmly. "My doctor gave me a clean bill of health just last month." "Memory issues can be tricky," the man interjected. "Often the person experiencing them doesn't realize there's a problem. That's why a supportive family is so important. Our facility has a wonderful program for transitional care," the woman continued. "Private apartments but with supervision and assistance as needed. Many residents find they actually prefer it to living alone." I realized with a start that these weren't random friends, they were administrators from an assisted living facility. Jackson had brought them here to evaluate me, to begin the process of moving me out of my own home. "I appreciate your concern," I said, working to keep my voice level, "but I have no intention of leaving my home." "Dad," Jackson said, his voice dripping with false patience, "no one's talking about decisions right now. We're just exploring options for when you need more support." "Which isn't necessary at present," I insisted, feeling my carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "We've all noticed the signs, King," Brady said, his tone condescending. "The confusion, the forgetfulness. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but it does need to be addressed." I stood up from the table. "I'm not confused or forgetful. I'm being deliberately pushed aside in my own home. See what I mean?" Jackson said to the others, gesturing toward me as if my legitimate anger were evidence of mental instability. "These mood swings are getting more frequent." "This is my house," I said firmly. "Purchased with Martha's inheritance, which she deliberately and legally left primarily to me, not to be split equally as you've been telling people." A tense silence fell over the table. Jackson's face flushed with anger. "You're confused, Dad. Mom would have wanted the inheritance shared. You manipulated things when she was too sick to know better." That blatant lie, an accusation that I had taken advantage of my dying wife, broke something inside me. 42 years of marriage, of partnership, of love and respect, reduced to a story of manipulation to serve Jackson's narrative. Your mother left explicit instructions, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. She made her decisions with clear mind and purpose. Because you influenced her, Jackson shouted, abandoning his facade of concerned son. You turned her against me. That's not true, I insisted. Martha loved you deeply, but she had concerns about what? My lifestyle? Is that what this is really about? Jackson interrupted, his voice rising further. You never really accepted me, did you? All these years pretending to be supportive, but when it came time to share the inheritance, suddenly I wasn't worthy. He was weaponizing his sexuality, using my past mistakes to deflect from his current manipulation. It was a calculated move, designed to make me appear prejudiced in front of his guests and to activate my guilt. This has nothing to do with your sexuality, Jackson. I'm proud of who you are and who you love. This is about honesty and respect, neither of which you're showing right now. Jackson stood up, his face contorted with rage, or perhaps performance. I couldn't tell anymore what was genuine and what was strategic. I've tried to handle this sensitively, to help you transition with dignity, but you're making that impossible. He turned to the others. I apologize for this scene. As you can see, Dad's condition is deteriorating faster than we thought. The elder care administrators nodded sympathetically while the Prestons looked on with calculated concern. Brady placed a supportive hand on Jackson's shoulder, casting a disappointed look in my direction. Here's how this is going to work, Dad, Jackson continued, his voice now cold and determined. You have two choices. You can voluntarily sign over joint ownership of this property to Brady and me. Remain in the garage apartment if you wish, and we'll make sure you're taken care of. Or we pursue legal guardianship based on your obvious cognitive decline, in which case you'll likely end up in a facility whether you want it or not. The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical threat. The other dinner guests shifted uncomfortably, witnessing something more raw and ugly than they'd signed up for. I need time to think, I finally said, recognizing that direct confrontation at this moment would only escalate things further. Take all the time you need until tomorrow, Jackson replied. But no longer. We have contractors scheduled to begin preliminary assessments next week, and we need this resolved. I nodded silently and left the dining room, retreating to the garage apartment where I could process what had just happened. My son had just openly threatened me, attempted to use my greatest regret against me as a weapon, and announced his intention to take my home by manipulation or force. The pain was almost unbearable. But beneath the hurt, a steely resolve was hardening. Jackson had shown his true intentions in front of witnesses. He had abandoned any pretense of concern for my welfare, and in doing so, he had freed me from my own paralyzing guilt and indecision. It was time to implement the final phase of my plan. The next morning, I approached Jackson and Brady as they sat having coffee on the deck. I've been thinking about what you said, I began, keeping my voice subdued and slightly tremulous, the confused elder they believed me to be. I don't want conflict. This property is beautiful, and perhaps you're right that it should stay in the family long term. Jackson exchanged a triumphant glance with Brady. That's very sensible, Dad. I promise we'll make sure you're comfortable. I'd like to consult with my attorney about the proper way to handle the transfer, I continued, just to make sure everything is done correctly. I don't think that's necessary, Brady interjected smoothly. We have excellent attorneys who can handle all the paperwork. No need to incur additional expenses. Still, I'd feel better having Walter look things over. He's managed my affairs for decades. Jackson frowned. Walter Davidson? He's practically retired, Dad, and he's your friend, hardly an objective advisor. Nevertheless, it's important to me, I insisted, allowing a hint of the stubborn father Jackson knew to emerge. If you want me to consider this transfer, Walter reviews the documents. That's my condition. After a tense moment, Jackson nodded reluctantly. Fine, but no delays. We need this resolved quickly. I'll speak with him today, I promised. And perhaps we could have a final dinner together tomorrow night? A chance to Clear the air before moving forward. That seems reasonable, Jackson agreed, clearly believing he'd won. We'll have the caterers prepare something special. No caterers, I said firmly. I'd like to cook. One last meal in my kitchen before changes happen. Jackson shrugged. If you insist, just don't go overboard. The Prestons have sophisticated tastes. As soon as I was alone, I called Walter and explained the latest developments. You're sure about this approach? He asked. It could permanently damage your relationship with Jackson. Our relationship is already damaged beyond recognition, I replied sadly. But I need to establish clear boundaries and truth, or there's no hope of ever rebuilding something authentic. Walter agreed to come to dinner the following evening, along with bringing the documentation of my recent medical evaluation, confirming my cognitive soundness. My next call was to Eleanor, who immediately agreed to attend as well. Martha would be heartbroken by this situation, she said, but proud of how you're handling it. Standing your ground without descending into bitterness isn't easy. My final preparations involved retrieving all my recordings and documentation, organizing them for clear presentation, and writing a letter to Jackson, one I hoped he would read once the immediate conflict was resolved. It wasn't an angry letter, but an honest one, expressing both my profound disappointment and my enduring love as his father. That afternoon, while checking the property listing online to gather final evidence, I discovered something that accelerated my timeline. Brady had already scheduled contractors to begin work the following week. The listing showed pending renovation status, with a construction start date just 5 days away. They weren't planning to wait for any formal transfer. They intended to begin claiming the property immediately. The discovery strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about protecting my home. It was about standing up against manipulation and deceit. Martha had worked her entire life for what she'd inherited, and then thoughtfully decided how it should be used after her death. I couldn't allow her wishes to be disregarded and her legacy distorted. I spent the rest of the day preparing a traditional family meal, Martha's pot roast with roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, and her famous apple pie for dessert. Simple, unpretentious food that represented our values and history. As I worked in the kitchen that had become my sanctuary, I felt Martha's presence more strongly than I had in months. "I'm doing what you would want," I whispered to the empty room. Standing firm but leaving room for healing if that's possible. By evening, everything was in place. The meal prepared, the documents organized, my witnesses confirmed for the following day. I'd arranged for Amy to be available by video call, giving her the option to participate without having to witness the potential ugliness in person. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had since Jackson's initial phone call. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it with clarity, courage, and the conviction that I was honoring not just my own dignity, but Martha's memory and intentions as well. The stage was set for a confrontation I never wanted, but could no longer avoid. My son had declared war on me in my own home, using my greatest regret as a weapon against me. Tomorrow he would discover that his 64-year-old father was not the easy target he'd assumed. The dining room looked beautiful in the early evening light. I'd set the table with Martha's good china, polished the silver candlesticks that had been a wedding gift, and arranged fresh flowers from the garden she'd inspired me to plant. The familiar aroma of pot roast filled the house. Not fancy enough for the Prestons, perhaps, but authentic to who Martha and I had been. Walter arrived first, followed shortly by Eleanor. I introduced them to the Prestons, Brady and Jackson, as family attorney and Martha's sister respectively. Jackson's expression tightened at Eleanor's presence. He'd always been somewhat intimidated by his aunt's directness. "I didn't realize this would be such a gathering," Jackson remarked tensely. "Important decisions should involve family," I replied calmly. "Please, everyone, take a seat. Dinner is ready." The meal began with strained small talk. The Prestons made minimal effort to hide their disdain for the simple food. Jackson seemed increasingly nervous, while Brady kept trying to move the conversation toward the business at hand. After the main course was finished, I stood and addressed the table. "Before dessert, I believe we have some matters to discuss." Jackson has asked me to consider transferring ownership of this house to him and Brady. For your own benefit, Dad? Jackson interjected quickly. As we've discussed, living alone isn't good for you anymore. I nodded thoughtfully. Yes, you've expressed concern about my cognitive state, and you've suggested that this property would be better utilized by you and Brady, particularly with the Preston family's interests in mind. Thomas Preston shifted uncomfortably. Catherine studied her wine glass with sudden intensity. I've prepared some documents to share with all of you, I continued, retrieving a folder from the sideboard. First, a complete medical evaluation performed last week, confirming that I am in excellent cognitive health with no signs of dementia or other impairment. I slid the report across the table. Jackson didn't touch it. Medical conditions can change rapidly at your age, he said dismissively. Next, the deed to this property, purchased entirely with funds from Martha's inheritance to me, legally and properly transferred, which should have been shared, Jackson muttered. That brings me to the third document, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion building inside me. Martha's personal letter, written 2 weeks before her death, explaining her wishes regarding her inheritance. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Jackson's face. I don't remember any letter, he said. It was included with the will, Eleanor confirmed. Martha was very specific about her intentions. I began reading Martha's letter aloud. When I reached the part specifically addressing Jackson and her concerns about his materialism, his face flushed red. That doesn't sound like Mom, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. It's her handwriting, Eleanor said gently. And it's exactly what she expressed to me before she died. She loved you deeply, Jackson, but she was concerned about certain tendencies she saw developing. Finally, I said, placing a small device on the table, recordings from this house over the past week, documenting the plan to have me declared incompetent and removed from my own home. The color drained from Jackson's face. You? Recorded us? Without permission? In my home, which is legal in this state, I confirmed. I have recordings of discussions about renovation plans already scheduled, about strategies to have me declared incompetent, and about using my initial reaction to your coming out as leverage against me. The Prestons exchanged alarmed glances. Brady stared at the device as if it might bite him. This is an invasion of privacy, Jackson sputtered, his confident facade crumbling. No, son. This was self-protection. You invaded my home, planned to take my property through manipulation and lies, and were willing to use my greatest regret, not responding perfectly when you came out, as a weapon against me. The room fell silent. Even the Prestons seemed uncomfortable now, witnessing a family drama they hadn't bargained for. I want to be absolutely clear, I continued, my voice firm but not angry. This house is mine, legally and morally. It was purchased with money Martha specifically left to me to build a new life after her death. I will not be declared incompetent. I will not be placed in a facility, and I will not be moved to the garage apartment of my own home. I turned to address the Prestons directly. Whatever financial arrangements or business plans you've made that involve this property need to be reconsidered. I'm not selling. I'm not transferring ownership. And I'm not interested in being part of any Preston family business ventures. Thomas Preston cleared his throat. We were led to believe the situation was different. Perhaps we should excuse ourselves from what appears to be a private family matter. Before you go, I said, you should know that I have copies of all these documents and recordings, including discussions of plans made in bad faith. I hope we can all agree that pursuing this matter further would be unwise. The message was clear, without being explicitly threatening. The Prestons stood, mumbling awkward goodbyes, and made a hasty exit. Brady looked uncertainly at Jackson, clearly trying to gauge whether to stay or follow the Prestons. Brady, I said quietly, I'd appreciate a moment alone with my son. After Brady reluctantly departed, the room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock that had been in Martha's family for generations. Jackson sat rigid in his chair, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face: anger, embarrassment, defensiveness, and something that might have been shame. Why? I finally asked. the simple question carrying the weight of all my hurt. Why lie about me? About your mother's wishes? Why try to take my home? Jackson stared at the table for a long moment before answering. The Prestons are practically bankruptcy, he finally said, his voice barely audible. Their hotel chain is failing. Brady's trust fund is nearly depleted. We needed something impressive, something to maintain our position. And that justified lying about my mental state? Planning to have me forcibly removed from my home? I told myself you'd be better off, he muttered. That you were lonely here, that a care facility would give you community. Those were rationalizations, not reasons, I said gently. This house represents security that Brady's family can no longer provide, doesn't it? Status that you've grown accustomed to. Jackson's shoulders slumped. For the first time, the carefully constructed facade of confident entitlement fell away completely. Everything's falling apart, he admitted. The Prestons are selling properties, laying off staff. Brady's family name still opens doors, but the financial reality is grim. When we saw this place, what it could become with renovation, you decided it should be yours. I convinced myself it was what Mom would have wanted, he said, a tear sliding down his cheek, that she would have helped us if she were still alive. Your mother would have helped you, I agreed, but not by financing an artificial lifestyle. She valued authenticity, hard work, building something real. That's what she tried to teach both you and Amy. Jackson looked up, his eyes wet. I've made such a mess of everything. Yes, I said simply. You have. What happens now? He asked, sounding suddenly young and uncertain. That depends on you, I replied. I won't press charges for the attempted fraud. I won't humiliate you by sharing the recordings with anyone else. But I need certain things from you if we're going to salvage any kind of relationship. What things? First, honesty. Complete and total honesty from now on. Second, respect for boundaries. This is my home, purchased with your mother's inheritance to me. That's not changing. Third, a public correction of any misinformation you've shared about the inheritance or this property. Jackson nodded slowly. And then we begin the slow work of rebuilding trust. It won't happen quickly. It will require effort and consistency on your part. Why would you even give me that chance? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. After what I tried to do? I smiled sadly. Because I'm your father. Because your mother would want me to leave the door open for reconciliation. And because I believe people can change if they truly want to. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, seemingly processing everything. I don't deserve another chance, he finally said. Probably not, I agreed. But you have one anyway. What you do with it is your choice. We talked for nearly 2 more hours that night. Really talked, perhaps more honestly than we had in years. Jackson spoke about the pressure of maintaining appearances in his social circle, about his fear of losing status, about his resentment that Amy had always seemed to have an easier relationship with both Martha and me. I acknowledged my own failings, how my initial reaction to his coming out had created a wound that never fully healed, how I had sometimes found it easier to focus on Amy and her family rather than navigate the more complicated relationship with him. By the time we finished talking, nothing was resolved completely. Years of misunderstanding and hurt couldn't be erased in one evening. But something had shifted. A door had opened to the possibility of a more authentic relationship. The next morning, the Prestons and Brady's other friends departed hurriedly. Brady himself seemed uncertain of his position, caught between his husband and his family's expectations. Jackson, for his part, was subdued, but no longer hostile. We'll find another way forward, he told Brady as they packed their car. One that doesn't involve taking advantage of my father. I stood on the porch as they prepared to leave, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for what had been revealed, relief that the truth was finally in the open, cautious hope that something better might eventually grow from this painful episode. Dad, Jackson said as he prepared to get in the car. I'm sorry, truly sorry. I know, I replied. This isn't the end of our story, son, just a difficult chapter. As I watched them drive away, I felt Martha's presence beside me, almost tangible in the gentle autumn breeze. "You'd be proud of him for finally telling the truth," I said softly. "And you'd forgive him. You always could see the best in people." 3 months later, Jackson called to ask if he could visit, alone this time. He arrived without pretense or agenda, and we spent a quiet weekend working in the garden Martha had loved, talking about memories both painful and precious, beginning the slow process of rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real, and after years of careful distance and polite facades, real felt like a gift. Martha had left her inheritance to help me find peace, to build a new chapter. In standing up for myself while leaving room for reconciliation, I'd honored her wishes in ways I hadn't anticipated. This house had become not just my sanctuary, but potentially the foundation for a more authentic family connection moving forward. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't giving people what they want. It's holding firm to what's true while giving them what they actually need: honesty, boundaries, and the dignity of facing consequences. Martha had understood that, and finally, so did I. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? How did you balance setting necessary boundaries while leaving room for possible reconciliation? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you found value in this story, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might benefit. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength and wisdom in your own family journeys.